So much for joining me. I thought I would do a refresher presentation for groupings of variations. This is relevant to the European Union and it relates to the Variation Regulation 1234 2008. So this is a refresher. It's not really going to start from first principles, and I'm going to be making the assumption that people who are looking at this video has already done numerous variations, and they don't really need to be taught from scratch. So it's really a refresher for myself because I just wanted to go through this particular post-approval activity. So as I said, the presentation is going to be about the types of variations that can be submitted as part of a group. This can be tricky sometimes to figure out what variations you should or could group. So I hope that this presentation can provide some clarity with regards to that. I'm going to talk about marketing authorisations, just give a very brief overview, because the different procedures for obtaining the marketing authorisation can affect and does affect the procedure that is used for post-approval applications and submissions. So for example, if your procedure for obtaining the marketing authorisation was through the centralised route, then all of your post-approval activities, including variations, grouped variations, and single variations, will be through the centrally authorised route. If your procedures for obtaining a marketing authorisation was from the national route or the mutual recognition decentralized procedural route, then your post-authorization applications will also be through that route. So your marketing authorization is the how. How did you obtain that, the marketing authorization, in order to be able to market your medicinal product in the region that you've obtained the marketing authorization. I'm also going to talk about the Variation Regulation 1234 2008. So basically that variation regulation is for when we want to change the registered information in our technical dossier. And I'm also going to talk about Annex 3, which is the justification for groupings. So I'm just going to give a very brief overview on all of these topics, and then I'm going to go and give some examples. So myself, I started off working in the labs actually as an analytical chemist. I started off doing stability testing all kinds of conventional medicines. So this would be testing different medicines that are stored at various conditions, storage conditions. These are ICH storage conditions. And these stability data will be used in order to obtain, or were used in order to obtain, marketing authorization. Then I moved on to method development and method validation, which is a natural progression because, these methods are stability indicating methods that have to be validated in order to use to test medicinal products. I then went into product development. So this is developing pharmaceutical products and answering questions by regulatory authorities by doing the analytical testing in order to generate the data. Then moved into change control. So whenever a manufacturer wants to change the manufacturing methods, they have to generate data in order to confirm that there's no impact on quality, safety and efficacy, and that the changes are equivalent in the sense that there's no changes in terms of bioavailability. So you do need to do some analytical testing to to confirm that. And then I did a circle and went back to QC testing before I then moved into regulatory affairs. In regulatory affairs, I started off in post-approval, and then I went on to do marketing authorization, and then I did a little bit of clinical trials. You do a little bit of clinical trials when you're doing marketing authorization applications, because for hybrid type medicinal products, you do have to conduct clinical trials and you have to compare it with your reference medicinal product to see whether or not the maximum concentration that's absorbed and the area under the curve, etc., are equivalent to the reference medicinal product. So you do have to do clinical trials for marketing authorization. You also have to do clinical trials if, say, for example, you're changing your formulation in any way to show that there's no changes to the reference medicinal product, or there's no changes to your medicinal product. And then I went into clinical trials for real, where you're using clinical trials to produce data for the translation into the clinic, and then for the pivotal clinical studies to obtain marketing authorizations. And the sorts of medicinal products that I've worked on, mainly conventional medicines, specialty medicines, biologics, pegylated antibodies, really with regards to pharmaceutical development of these pegylated antibodies to support clinical trials and vaccines. And to a small extent, I've worked on advanced therapy medicinal products. Right, so I just want to give some background information, and I just assume that everybody knows this, but it may or may not be the case, but it's just good to get it out of the way. And this is about the European Union and the European Economic Area. So the United Kingdom, Switzerland and Monaco do not participate in any EU procedures. So they don't participate in mutual recognition procedures, decentralized procedures, or centrally authorized procedures. And the reason for that is that they are no longer part of the United Kingdom is no longer part of the European Union, even if from a regional perspective it is in the European area, but it's not actually part of the European Union, so it doesn't have the same European frameworks do not apply to the United Kingdom, so they do not participate in EU regulatory frameworks. And then we're talking about European Economic Area. So European Economic Area is different to European Union. So all of the countries within the European Union are part of the European Economic Area, but all of the countries in the European Economic Area are not part of the EU. And this is really due to the European Free Trade Association. I think there's some kind of agreement, and these affect 3 countries: Iceland, Norway and Liechtenstein. And basically that agreement allows those 3 countries to have free trade and free movement across borders, and to have the same benefits as being part of the EU, the European Union, but not actually a full member of the European Union. From a regulatory perspective, it means that Iceland, Norway and Liechtenstein can participate in EU regulatory procedures. So decentralized procedures, mutual recognition procedures and centralized procedures. The Iceland, Norway and Liechtenstein can participate in those processes and procedures. And then we have all the 27 countries in the European Union as listed in that first green box. So it's just an awareness as to what countries can participate in these decentralized procedures, mutual recognition procedures and centralized procedures. All the other countries will have national procedures. So non-EU countries such as Switzerland and the United Kingdom, if you want to obtain a medicinal product marketing authorization, you go through the marketing route, the national route. Right, a marketing authorization, what is that? So a marketing authorization is a grant, or it's a decision from either a competent authority, if it's a national route, or from the European Medicines Agency, if it's through the centralized route. And what it is a decision or a grant that enables the holder to be able to manufacture, to test, to perform batch release activities, to distribute and supply that medicinal product in the countries that they've been authorized to do so. A grant and the authorization will consist of the grant document itself, or the decision document, and the technical dossier, and that will also include the technical dossier will also include the product information. And the route of authorization is the how the marketing authorization was obtained. And as I said, it's important because all post-approval activities and submissions should be submitted through those routes. Regulatory strategy and the condition that's being treated and the modality of the medicinal products, to a large degree, those things determine the route of authorization. So, for example, your medicinal product could be used to be treat neurodegenerative diseases or diabetes or HIV. If it's used to treat those conditions, then that means that that medicinal product can only be authorized within the European Union through the centralized routes. If your medicinal product is an advanced therapy medicinal product, the centralized route is the only way, in my opinion and in my knowledge, that you can register that medicinal product for use for marketing in the European Union. But if your medicinal product is a conventional medicinal product, it's not new, you can have, if you choose to, determine to market that product in certain countries, and you may decide to go through the decentralized procedural route. If it's something that already has a license in one of the EU countries, you can then go through the mutual recognition route. So it really depends. Your regulatory strategy depends upon the type of medicinal product that you have, the modality. It also depends very much upon the condition being treated. This is within the European Union. With regards to the United Kingdom has national procedures, and those national procedures have very much been incorporated into UK law because of the fact that all national procedures stem from or derive from directives. I'll go into that in more detail later. So here it is, directives versus regulation. So a directive is a legal act, and it was created by the European Union, and it sets directions, if you like, or the goals or rules for all member states to follow. So it's not actually legally binding. It's just basically a legal act that enables member states, if you like, to interpret and transpose into their own law. And how each country decides to apply or implement these rules is determined on a national level. And the directives that relate to human medicines are listed there: 2001 83 EC, and for veterinary medicines it's 2001 82 EC. And these directives are used for national procedures. So because of the fact that each country determines how to implement these rules, you may very well get some differences in the interpretation, and therefore you will have a situation where you have country-specific requirements. And most pharmaceutical companies have a regulatory affiliate, if you like, or contact, who has all of the regulatory intelligence that relates to that particular country. And that's because how each country decides to apply or implement the rules is determined on a national level, and so therefore you can get deviations. Regulation is a legal act by the EU that applies directly and uniformly to all member states without the requirement for adaptation into the national law. So you basically interpret the regulation exactly as it is stated, and there's no there's no national requirements unless it allows for that. And when we're talking about marketing authorization, this relates to the regulation EC number 726 2004, and this is for centrally authorized procedures. The agency that's responsible for the assessment, review and decisions is the European Medicines Agency. So that's the difference between the directives and regulations. The regulations are for the centrally authorized procedures, whereas the directives, they are the overarching directions, but each country has implemented it into their own national law and they have national procedures. So, what is a variation to the terms of a marketing authorization? So, whenever you have your marketing authorization and it's granted, your marketing authorization must reflect what you're actually doing. So all of the manufacturing information on your CTD dossier should actually reflect what the manufacturers do. Your batch release arrangements should be aligned with what is in or on your technical dossier. You have to ensure that you comply with the information that has been registered. And the reason is that, that the regulatory authorities, it's their role to oversee marketing authorization holders to ensure public health and safety. So whenever you want to make changes to your marketing authorization, whenever you want to make changes with regards to your manufacturer, say as a one example, you have to submit a variation in order to advise the competent authorities or the regulators, the agency, that you are making this change. And variations to the terms of the marketing authorization, it's a regulation that concerns the examination of the variation. So it consists of what the competent authorities or the agencies, what do they want to examine? What do they want to know? What do they consider to be critical information? So for example, what conditions do they expect to be met if you're going to be doing a certain kind of change? And what documentations do they want to see if you're going to be making those kinds of changes? And this is what the variation categories with all of the checklists and the confirmations or the conditions and the documents that you need to provide is all about. It's all about the examination, what the competent authorities want to examine, what they want to see, what they want to know before you actually make that change, or if, say, for example, it's a do and tell after you've made that change. So say, for example, if you've been manufacturing and testing and releasing your medicinal product and you want to, say, reduce the number of testing that you do on a particular product, say you don't want to test it every batch, you want to test it every 10th batch, and you've accumulated data that supports you to do that, well, you can submit a variation in order to change the testing frequency of a particular batch, and therefore you would need to update various sections. You would need to justify the fact that you can do that and it's not going to impact on your quality, and that's by showing that your manufacturing process is very well controlled. So you would need to then vary the terms of your marketing authorization. So as I said earlier, variations must follow the procedures used for the grant of the marketing authorization. So again, as I say, centralized procedure, variations follow the centralized route. National procedures, variation follow the national route. And decentralized procedures or mutual recognition procedures, variation follows down those routes. And the only exception for that is work sharing, where you have a maybe super grouping. If you have a large variation, number of marketing authorizations that are from different procedures, where and how you can submit those, I'll discuss later. Right, so here, what is in a variation submission pack? And now, this is something that everybody, if you've done multiple variations, you would already be familiar with, and you don't need me to go through this. However, it's just just to be covering all bases. But there would be working instructions and standard operating procedures for you to follow. And I'm not going to cover this because this is something that internally you would require. So cover letter, application forms, your present and proposed needs to be in your forms. Your guideline checklist has to be confirmed. You have to confirm that you've met all the conditions and that you've provided all the documents. Your letter of authorization is required for centrally authorized procedures, supporting documentation. Say, for example, that example that I gave earlier about reduced testing, you need to provide batch analysis data to show that there's no impact or change and that you've got a very good control over your manufacturing process. Your amended CTD sections, fees, local requirements. So that certain countries have additional requirements that have to be met so that you can avoid invalidation. You may have to have authority confirmation emails, and you might have to provide validation reports. So all of these things are typical sort of documents that you would put in a variation application. A caveat, and that is that for active substance master file, you're going to have different documentation. You'll have things like letter of access, table of contents, and specific documentation that references the active substance master file itself. You may have closed sections and open sections of the active substance master file because the manufacturer might not be the owner of the master file. So this is the sort of documentation that you'd submit, and we're not going to go into a lot of detail for that. Right, in the UK, what happens? So in the UK, currently for Northern Ireland, they can participate in EU procedures, but they have to be a concerned member state only for mutual recognition decentralized procedures. And I think also for centralized procedures as well, they can be, they obviously it's the European Medicines Agency that is the assessing agency, so that's not an issue. But for the UK, that's England, Scotland and Wales, all national authorisations are maintained through the national route. So there's no UK do not participate in EU procedures on any level, England, Scotland and Wales. But because of the Northern Ireland Agreement, Northern Ireland can participate as a concerned member state. With regards to the variation classification, the UK are currently following the EU procedures. So that regulation was incorporated into UK law as a result of Brexit. And then there's new variations to purely national marketing authorization that's been stated there, but the current variation classification guidelines do continue to apply. Right, so what are the reasons that you would need to change your marketing authorization, and why would you need to do so? So first of all, marketing authorization holders have a legal obligation to keep up to date with current technologies. So for example, if there are better analytical testing methods and procedures that are more sensitive, precise, better accuracy, then they have a duty or an obligation to replace currently registered methods with those most up-to-date methods. Marketing authorization holders have to ensure that they utilize technologies that are safe, that are better and more efficient and more effective. And this is good manufacturing practice. In addition to that, manufacturers will often conduct product annual reviews where they collate batch analysis data, stability data, manufacturing batch record data. Analyzing these data can produce and give them insight with regards to how they can be more efficient and what they can do to reduce the workload and make it more streamlined. And by doing so, they may be required to submit a variations. So on review of the data, they may assess and come to the conclusion that they can make some changes, and those changes are submitted by way of a variation. They may also have external reasons for submitting variations. Very often safety data, well, not very often, safety data is actually collected by the European Medicines Agency on all the medicines, and very often or sometimes you can get a PRAC recommendation. So that's the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee, where they will require updates to marketing authorization product information. And this is an Article 3031 notification where your marketing authorization may be selected and you may have to update your summary of product information and your patient information leaflet and your labels as a result of safety or clinical information and knowledge. So here are the reasons that I've got. I've got clinical and safety and or safety. Site addition is a very often a reason, or site expansion. The use of advanced machinery, batch size increases, process optimization, and changes in legislation. These are all reasons why marketing authorization holders are required to update their marketing authorization by way of a variation. So I just want to just quickly touch, not for very long, on product information and why you may need to update it and where those drives are coming from. So externally, product information may be linked to a reference medicinal product. So if your reference medicinal product makes updates and those updates are approved, and you have a generic medicinal product tied to that reference, then you have to update your medicinal product in line with that generic medicinal product. For the agency may or competent authority may request that you make changes to your product information as a result of data that they're given. So this could be like something I've just discussed with regards to the PRAC committee, the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee, where they make updates or they suggest updates to your product information. So those are externally driven reasons why your product information, so this would be your summary of product characteristics would be, and your patient information leaflet, maybe your label would be updated. Internally, your pharmacovigilance systems will require that you do reviews, clinical reviews, or external reviews, and those reviews may, following consultation and following discussion, require you to update your safety information. Your company core data sheet is a company document. It's not a document that has any hold with the regulators or with the agencies, but you may have to, or it may be part of your systems to ensure that your product information aligns with the company core data sheet. We do know that some countries deviate slightly when they with regards to the company core data sheets, and those deviations or approved deviations are captured. But where you have identified updates to your summary of product characteristics and consequential updates to your pill or labels or inserts, you need to submit a variation. Now, if those variations are not clinically related, they need to be submitted separately as separate applications. So you can submit them all at the same time and reference the parallel submission in the application form. It's difficult to manage in terms of implementation and approval, because a lot of these labels and leaflets have to be published, they have to be updated and integrated and implemented into the medicinal product documentation. So there's all kinds of reasons for updating your product information, and you have to work with various departments to ensure that you remain compliant with your technical dossier, compliant with your marketing authorization, and also compliant with your systems, internal systems. Right, so there's another document relating to variations. This is to the details of the various categories for variations. So whenever you're submitting a variation, the competent authority or the agency, they have given us guidance as to what they want to examine, what they want to see, what conditions they want to have been met, and what documentation we should provide them. But the most important thing, this is kind of like I don't know, a checklist of things that you need to do. The most important thing when you're submitting or making your submission is you need to ensure that you align the variation change category that you are wanting to implement in your manufacturing plant, say for example. It has to be aligned correctly to the change category in the guideline. You need to ensure that you select the correct criteria. You know, you can't, if you choose the wrong category, then you're choosing the wrong conditions, you're choosing the wrong documents to submit. So that's the first and the most important thing you need to do. Ensure that the variation change category in the guideline aligns to the actual change that the marketing authorization holder wants to make. Select the correct criteria. And then you have to check that all the conditions have been met for the category that you've selected. And you don't have to necessarily provide statements, you just tick them off in the guideline checklist. But internally, you need to ensure, say, for example, with the manufacturer, that these conditions have been met. And they may need to provide you with documentation that you keep in order to prove that you've obtained that confirmation of with regards to condition. And then you need to check that the documentation that you need to submit is actually supportive of the application. So it does actually align with what is requested in the guideline checklist or the guideline guideline on the details of categories for variation. So does it actually align? Does it actually do that? Is it fit for purpose? Does it support the application? And is it submission ready? And then you need to check off. So this is where you tick off in the application forms and in the checklist documents that the conditions and the documentations have been met. Now, if you don't meet the conditions but you still want to submit the variation, then that variation is escalated. So for example, if you have a type 1A variation and you don't have one of the documentation that is required, say for example, if they require 2 certificates of analysis and you can only provide 1 certificate of analysis, because there's a scientific rationale for that, and the rationale could be that you only manufacture 1 batch a year, and so you only have 1 certificate of analysis, and the certificate of analysis is the product is only stable for 12 months. Or less than 12 months. So therefore, if it's only stable for 12 months, then the C of A will expire by the time you collect the second certificate of analysis. In that particular case, you have a very good, strong scientific justification for not being able to provide 2 C of A's. But so you don't meet the conditions if that's one of the conditions that you have to provide 2 C of A's. And therefore, your type 1A variation becomes a type 1B. And you need to justify why you will only be able to provide a type 1 certificate of analysis. And what that probably means is that the second certificate of analysis has to be either provided to the competent authorities or the agency, or you will have to provide them with some kind of commitment with regards to the the quality of the medicinal products for the second batch. So a type 1A becomes a type 1B if you don't meet the conditions or have all the documents. A type 1B can become a type 2 variation if you don't meet the conditions or you have the documentation. And the guideline on the detail of variation categories of variations, I've provided a link where you can find that information. So the categorization of variations, the type of variations that we're discussing. Again, this is very basic stuff. Everybody should really, if you've already done lots of variations, you should know what all of this is. But I'll just quickly run through them. So you have type 1As. So type 1As can be type 1A immediate notification, and type 1As. Now, type 1As are what we call do and tell. So you do the change, you make the change, and then you inform the regulators. If it's an immediate notification, you need to submit your variation within 2 weeks of implementation. If it's just a simple type 1A, you can submit within 12 months of implementation. So minor variations are type 1As. And then you have a minor variation of the type 1B type. This is different. This is a tell and then do. So you need to obtain approval before you can implement. Normally there's a 6 months period from approval to implementation. You've got 6 months to implement. If you don't implement within that time frame, you need to advise the competent authority or the agency. Type 2 variations are major variations. This is tell and then do. So you need to get approval before you implement. You have 6 months to implement, or you can implement on the next manufacturer run, whatever is sooner. And for type 1Bs and type 2s, where the changes affect product information, for example, summary of product characteristics and pills, some companies implement within 3 months, but I think you have 6 months to implement. And then we have urgent safety restrictions. So this is Article 22 of the variation regulation, and this allows you to implement these changes first and then submit to the competent authority or agency. And the reason why you would do so is because you are taking immediate action to protect the public. And then you have extensions, and extensions are almost like marketing authorization applications. They're like new marketing authorization applications. But again, you can only implement on approval. And of course, the sunset clause applies to extensions. So if you don't put any medicinal products on the market for 3 years of continuous release, then the authorization will naturally expire. So these are just a basic overview of the types of changes that you make to a marketing authorization. So let's talk about groupings of variations. So all variations must be submitted through the route that the MA was granted. That's true, but the exception of this is work sharing. So grouping means you could submit one application, and that one application can consist of multiple changes if and when justified, or it can also consist of multiple marketing authorizations. So what I mean by one application is one cover letter, one application form. You'll have your fees for each country, but it's one submission pack. And the justification for grouping should really align with Annex 3 as much as possible, and it should be meaningful to review those the documentations and the marketing authorization or the changes together. So that's the justification for grouping, that it makes sense to put all of these marketing authorizations or all of these changes together and review them all at once. And it's very ineffective and inefficient to review them separately. And then there's a slight difference with regards to grouping. Normally, as I said, if you get your grant through MA route, you can only submit via the MA for post-approval activities. However, if you are grouping different procedures, say for example mutual recognition, decentralized procedures or centralized procedures, you can submit them into, say for example, the European Medicines Agency if you have a centralized procedure in that mix. So grouping can use different procedures if and when it's justified. I also just want to quickly talk about change of ownership applications. Change of ownership applications only progress through the national route, as far as I'm aware. It doesn't go through any kind of grouped variation route. So how you group, where to submit and when to submit, and the notifications to the agency or the authority, there's certain rules that you need to follow for that. Now, let's talk about unforeseen variations. So, unforeseen variations is where in that category checklist, you don't have the variation that reflects the change that you're looking to implement. And that's an Article 5 unforeseen variation. In the first instance, what you should do is you should check the CMDH website. I've given the link there. To see whether or not that particular change has already been identified by some other marketing authorization holder in the industry. If it's there, then you can use that particular one and refer to the CMDH website as a justification for the choice of your category. However, if it isn't there, you then have to contact the relevant regulatory authorities or the European Medicines Agency, and they have 45 days to return a response. So I think I've said this before, work sharing. If you're mixing centralized procedures with national procedures or MRDC procedures, you need to submit to the European Medicines Agency. Any centralized procedural compound has to be reviewed by the EMA. You need to notify them, give them a minimum of 2 months, and obtain their approval to review the group. If you're submitting mutual recognition, decentralized procedures, and national procedures, national MAs, you need to notify a national competent authority. Again, you need to give them a minimum of 2 months notice, get their confirmation that whoever's acting as a reference member state is acceptable to all of the other reference member states in the procedure if you've got more than one MRDC procedure in your super group. But you need to obtain approval and confirmation from the assessing reference member state, and you need to give them notice in advance of your submission. Right, so as far as I'm aware, if you have one marketing authorization, you can submit as many type 1A variations as you want. They have to be type 1A or type 1A immediate notification. And they don't necessarily have to be related to each other, so they can all be type 1As. But you can only do that if you have one medicinal marketing authorization. If you have multiple marketing authorization, then all of the changes have to be, they all have to be identical, because it has to make sense to review and approve them all at the same time. Whenever you are submitting a type 1A, a load of type 1A variations, you need to ensure that you respect the implementation dates. So the earliest implementation date has to be respected. You don't submit, you don't submit a later, past the implementation date just because you've got another type 1A variation that has a later implementation date. Always have to respect the implementation date of the earliest. So this is only applicable, say, where you have multiple type 1A variations, which are all different from one another, if you have one marketing authorization, so one product. Next thing on the list is where you have two marketing authorizations. So you have several type 1As or type 1As immediate notification affecting more than one marketing authorization. And as I said, the changes have got to be identical for each medicinal product, because that makes it meaningful and efficient to review them. It's not a way of hiding applications from the authority. They need to ensure that what they're doing for one is applicable to all the other marketing authorizations. So the implementation dates have to be respected for all of them if it includes a type 1A. Again, this is the same thing where you have several types of variation affecting more than one medicinal product under a single application. I'll go through this in Annex 3. So the Annex 3 variation regulation talks about a lot of this, and I will go through this. But where you are submitting multiple marketing authorizations, multiple products, they have to be identical submissions for each marketing authorization. So what is applicable for one marketing authorization will be applicable for all the others, and that makes it efficient to review them all together and get them all approved all together. You can't submit different changes for different marketing authorization in the same single application. So, what is Annex 3? So, Annex 3 lists all the conditions under which a marketing authorization holder can group variations and submit it as a single application. It tells you what variations you can group. It doesn't actually tell you about the work sharing procedures. I think that was me just getting carried away. And it doesn't actually tell you about the documentation, the fact that it's got to be identical changes if there's more than one marketing authorization. But Annex 3 does allow for consistency with respect to review and approval across the whole of the EU. So it's an efficient way of making multiple identical changes to more than one marketing authorization if that's what you're choosing to do. Let's go through Annex 3. So the first one on the list is one of the variations in the group is an extension of the marketing authorization. So when you have an extension, you're basically having a new MA for a new, a new strength or a new therapeutic indication, or maybe a new, a new patient population, say, as per this particular example that I'm giving. But you can also submit other changes with that extension, even if they're not directly related to the extension themselves. And in this grouping, it allows you to streamline the approval process. So you don't have to submit multiple applications, do you know what I mean, afterwards. You can just submit them all as a group. Always make sure that you obtain competent authority approval or acknowledgement with regards to what you're intending to submit. And but always, I think that's a given with this kind of thing. You don't want to get your application invalidated or rejected. But this is one of the examples, according to Annex 3, where you can group and you can make multiple changes to your marketing authorization in the one application. The second thing on Annex 3 is one of the variations in the group is a major variation of the type 2, and all the other variations are consequential to this major variation of type 2. So this is very, very typical of what we do most of the time. So you might have one variation which is a type 2. Here you might be replacing or adding a finished product manufacturing site. And consequential to that is the packaging site will need to be added. So if the manufacturing site is doing the packaging, primary packaging and secondary packaging, then they have to be added on your technical dossier, on your license details, your registered information. And so these are consequential variations, because you wouldn't be adding those primary packaging sites or secondary packaging sites if you were not adding the new manufacturer. You may also be wanting to make changes to your importation or batch release arrangements and quality control testing, and these would be consequential variations, because you wouldn't be doing those changes if you were not adding this new manufacturing site. So all those variations can be submitted as a group. It's a group variation where the major variation is a type 2, which is the replacement or addition of the manufacturing site, and all the other consequential variations, they're consequential to this major variation, that they wouldn't be happening if you were not having to do that type 2 variation. So this is just an example of a type 2 variation group. Now, I've got type 1A immediate notification implementation in brackets there and a question mark, and that is that how do you implement type 1A variations? Do you implement them first and then do your submission, or do you wait until you get approval of the whole group before implementation? And the answer is you can do either one of the two. You can implement it first before you submit, or you can wait until you've got approval of the group and then implement it on approval of the group. It really depends on, it doesn't depend on anything. It's a choice. Right, the next thing on the list is one of the variations in the group is a minor variation of type 1b. All the other variations in the group are minor variations which are consequential to this minor variation of type 1b. And that's very similar to what we've just done. The only difference is it would be a type 1b. So all the variations would be consequential to this type 1b variation, and and that will be the justification for submitting it as a group. The next thing on the list is all of the variations in the group relate solely to changes of administrative nature to the summary of product characteristics, labeling and packaging leaflet or insert. So whenever you're submitting your changes to your SMPC, if you're looking at different sections and those changes do not relate to one another, ordinarily you would have to separate out the sections and submit them separately, which is very, unwieldy and very sort of labour intensive for both the marketing authorization holder and the competent authorities or the regulators or the agency. So what this says is that if you're only making administrative changes to your SMPC, you don't have to separate them out. You can just submit them as a group and get them approved as a group. And that is just so much more efficient and effective, because it means that when you implement those changes, you're not hanging around waiting for other changes to occur before you can implement those changes. So it just makes the QP's life much more easier. So these kinds of variations, administrative nature, you can then submit as a group. Number 5, all the variations in the group relate solely to changes in the active substance master file, vaccine antigen master file, or plasma master file. So if you're having to update a master file, and this is an example here, an active substance master file, where you have a number of changes that have been identified by the holder of the active substance master file, and these changes can be submitted as a group. You don't separate them out because they relate to the master file, and there is a specific way to submit master file updates, and there are guidelines relating to that, but you list all of the changes in the one application. You reference the master file itself, so it will have a reference number, and most active substance master file will have an open and closed section if the master file isn't owned by the marketing authorization holder or the manufacturer. So you would then require a letter of access if some of the sections that have been updated relate to the closed sections of your master file. So these kinds of variations, they can be submitted in a group. So there's a group of variations, a group of changes that are required or that are applicable, and this active substance master file update could be applicable to multiple marketing authorizations. So you have identical changes that relate to your active substance master file across a number, more than one or more marketing authorizations. So this is grouped, and you can make one submission, and you can justify it by it's an active substance master file update, and it is meaningful to review and approve them all at the same time. The next thing on the list is all variations in the group relate to a project intended to improve the manufacturing process and quality of the medicinal products concerned or its active substances. So this is where companies, it's part of their systems, their pharmaceutical quality systems, where they have a responsibility to not just keep up to date, but to understand their manufacturing process, their design space. All of these things mean that they can make changes to the design space, and they can do those changes as a result of performing certain activities. Those activities are listed in those spheres there. So this is process performance and product quality monitoring. So these are like annual product quality reviews where you will look at data from the manufacturing plant. You look at batch analysis data, stability data, manufacturing records, and you can make efficiencies. You can understand your process better and provide more defined, if you like, criteria, established conditions for your manufacturing process. And also, we learn from mistakes. So corrective and preventative actions usually occur after some kind of root cause analysis or assessment where something has gone wrong and you want to implement changes to ensure that the actual root cause is dealt with and not the actual symptoms itself. So you're dealing with the root cause, and those corrective and preventative actions will ensure that it doesn't happen again. And this is just optimizing your system, learning from experience and implementing the changes in order to prevent those things from happening again. Most companies, as part of their pharmaceutical quality systems, will have a change management system, which will consist of your change control, and they will also have a management review step. So all of these processes means that companies can identify in advance sometimes what changes that they need to make in order to to ensure that they have control over their manufacturing process. And those changes will be submitted by way of a variation. There are various routes of doing so. So ICH-Q10 can also allow for, I think it's post-approval change management. But it's basically about pharmaceutical systems, process improvement, and product quality monitoring, monitoring ongoing activities as part of understanding and defining your medicinal products design space. And the benefits of this is that they can implement changes when it is suitable for them, and that they have that regulatory flexibility, and it's a continuous improvement process. So this is an example of defining your plans in advance, getting them approved in advance in order to ensure that you're compliant with GMP and the relevant legislation. And for this, you can submit a change management protocol. This is just one example, and that change management protocol, which is usually a type 2 variation, you can submit it for multiple marketing authorizations. So these are the reasons why it's important to to be able to make changes to your marketing authorization from when you were granted. So this is the post-approval change management system, and this is an outcome of the life cycle management system for post-approval. And it really relates to ICH-Q12, where you can agree in advance with the regulators on how to manage your post-approval changes. And it's just an efficient process because it means that, marketing authorization holders are not having to be submitting each variation, each change, and waiting for the approval before implementation. I mean, that does go on to an extent, but this is really about planning in advance and, utilizing this particular category in order to make those changes. Yeah, yeah. Right, the next thing on the list is all variations in the groups are changes affecting the quality of a human pandemic influenza vaccine. So I guess every time the virus changes, you will have to change the quality information relating to the human pandemic vaccine, and therefore you might be able to group those variations and those changes together. I haven't done one for this. Maybe you have, and you can give me an example. Number 8, all variations in the group are changes to the pharmacovigilance system, referred to in Article 8 of Directive 2001/83/EC. So your pharmacovigilance system is usually applicable irrespective of the medicinal type, medicinal product itself. So you can submit your changes as one group to all of the marketing authorizations, and that is something that's typically done, I think, for in most pharmaceutical companies. Next, all variations in the group are consequential to a given urgent safety restriction and submitted in accordance with Article 22. So again, this is to make things easy. If you have a number of changes to your SMPC as a result of some urgent safety restriction that can impact on the safe use of your medicinal product, then you don't want to be making separate submissions. You want to be able to group all those changes and get them approved as quickly as possible. The urgent safety restriction, it allows for immediate changes to your marketing authorization if some kind of urgent safety concern has been identified. And basically, the marketing authorization holder can use this mechanism to change their product information and then implement those changes, and then within a short time frame submit the application to the agency. I've left a link to the website for you when you want to look at that for reference. All variations in the group relate to implementation of a given class labeling. So I haven't done one of these for a long time. I don't think they've been around for some time, but a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, NSAID, there was a class labeling for that where the sections of the SMPC affected were section 4.2, 4.4, 4.8 and 5.1. And ordinarily, if those changes were not related to one another, you would have to separate them out. But because this change relates to a class labeling, you can submit them all in the same group. And you can also submit it for multiple NSAIDs, because there are more than one different types of NSAIDs, but you do need to make sure that the changes are identical, or at least they are identical to what has been provided by the authorities. So those are the sections of the SMPC that are updated, and consequential to that is the pill sections that need to be updated, and these can be submitted as a group using that Annex 3 justification in your application form. All of the variations are consequential to the assessment of a given periodic safety update report. So when you submit your periodic safety update report, they can come back with recommendations to update your SMPC and justifications as to why they are requiring you to update your SMPC. Because it's already been assessed, you don't have to submit them as separate. You can simply group them and refer to the periodic safety update report that was assessed, and you can say that these changes are consequential to that update report. All the variations in the group are consequential to a given post-authorization study conducted under the supervision of the holder. So the marketing authorization holder could decide to do some kind of post-authorization safety study. They might be wanting to find out whether or not a certain population can use this particular medicinal product, and so they may do some kind of safety study, clinical study, or they may be wanting to investigate long-term effects. So for example, in that example, long-term cardiovascular effects of the drug. If it's something that is a project by the marketing authorization holder, then any updates as a result of that is as an outcome of that particular study. And it makes sense, because they are directly consequential to the outcome of the post-approval study, to review them all together rather than to separate them as multiple submissions, if they may, for example, may not necessarily be clinically related. So those kinds of variations can be submitted as a group. Number 13, all variations in the group are consequential to a specific obligation. So basically, this is for centrally authorized medicinal products, the renewal. Whenever you do your renewal, there could be a request or an obligation to submit variations. Those variations can be submitted as a group only for centrally authorised medicinal products. They can be submitted as a group and this justification provided. I think for national and mutual recognition procedures, all of the other Annex 3 justifications can be used. But this is specific for centrally authorised, where you can use the reason for the group is that the request comes from the agency and is consequential or as a consequence or specific obligation of a renewal, and therefore you can submit it as a group. The next thing is all of the variations are consequential to a specific procedure or condition. So these procedures, Article 14 of Regulation EC number 726/2004 and Article 22 of Directive 2001/83/EC, they relate to conditional grants. So if you have a marketing authorization that has been granted as a conditional grant, it means that the authorities or the agencies, they require additional data to be generated after grant, and those data can be submitted as part of a group. So in the example here, for centrally authorized material, you may be required to conduct further studies. You may be required to do additional monitoring. And as a result of that, you need to be able to submit any changes to your marketing authorization as a group, or you may be required to submit that data as a group to the competent authority as a variation group. And the same for the National Marketing Authorization Framework. If there is a conditional authorization, you can submit it as a group. The reason why we have these conditional authorizations is because for some conditions, because the condition is so rare, you might not be able to have the clinical data that is normally required for marketing authorization. But agencies want to ensure that the public in their regions have access to medicines, and therefore they will grant conditional authorizations with specific obligations, and those specific obligations will require you to submit data to them, and you can submit those data as part of a group. Right, so that's the end of my presentation. Here are all the links for the useful information that you might find relevant. I specifically recommend the questions and answers for classification of changes. I hope you've enjoyed my presentation. If you have, please leave a comment or a like. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.